A delivery man stands outside a burning house, and someone is screaming at him to stay back. That's private property. You'll get yourself killed. The neighbor's voice cuts through the smoke. But Daniel isn't listening. Because he heard something. Something no one else heard. A sound so faint the man standing there for 10 minutes swears it doesn't exist. Behind that iron gate, smoke pours from the roof. The fire trucks are coming. Everyone says wait. He picks up a ceramic planter. If you break that window glass shatters. What Daniel doesn't know, the woman trapped inside that house has 10 minutes left to live. What he also doesn't know, she owns the largest logistics empire in the region. And when they finally pull her out barely breathing, barely conscious, she'll turn her head, look straight at him, and say his name. A name he never told anyone. Daniel Pruitt woke up at 5:14, not because of an alarm, because of the ceiling. There was a stain up there. Water damage from a pipe that had leaked 2 winters ago and been patched, but not painted over because painting over it cost money, and money was the thing that Daniel was always just slightly short of. The stain was roughly the shape of a hand, or a question mark. Depending on the light, depending on the morning. This morning it looked like a question mark, which felt accurate. He lay there, for a while, not sleeping, not quite thinking. Just existing in that particular pre-dawn space where the day hasn't started demanding things of you yet, and you can almost pretend for about 30 seconds that everything is fine. Then his brain woke up. And everything was not fine, not catastrophically, not dramatically. Just in the quiet, persistent Tuesday morning way that his life had been not fine for the better part of 3 years. The way that didn't make for a good story. Just a long one. He sat up. The mattress made its sound. The sound that said, I have been patient with you, but I am not going to be patient forever. He knew. He'd been meaning to replace it since last spring. He hadn't replaced it. The bathroom mirror was small and hung slightly crooked, because the screw on the left had stripped out, and he'd been meaning to fix that too. A running theme in his life, the things he'd been meaning to do. A whole museum of deferred maintenance, and him the only visitor. He looked at his reflection. 34 years old. Dark circles that weren't new, jaw that needed a shave he'd get to eventually. The face of a man who was fine, functionally fine. Fine in the way that means you get up and you do the thing and you don't make a fuss about any of it. He splashed cold water on his face. Thought about his mother. Didn't want to think about his mother. Thought about her anyway. Ruth Pruitt was 63 years old and lived 400 miles south in a house with a leaky gutter she refused to let anyone fix, and a cat named Gerald who occupied the armchair he wasn't supposed to be on with the entitlement of someone who had never once been told no. She had a condition. The condition had taken 4 doctors and 18 months to name properly, and once they named it, they handed her a form with a number printed at the bottom. $4,200. That was just the deposit. Daniel had checked his account the night before. $847. He'd checked it twice, the way you do when you're hoping the number will change between the first look and the second. It did not change. He went to the kitchen. Made coffee in a pot that was older than his last relationship. Stood at the counter to drink it because sitting down felt like committing to something. He had 17 deliveries today. 17 boxes going to 17 addresses, most of which would be answered by someone who would sign the tablet and close the door without making eye contact. That was fine. He was good at being the person no one made eye contact with. He pulled on the uniform, dark pants, gray shirt with the company logo above the left breast pocket, Ridgeline Delivery Services. The logo was a stylized R inside a circle. The circle was supposed to suggest motion or maybe the world. He'd never asked. It didn't matter. It was just a shirt. His phone buzzed on the counter. St. Augustine Medical Center Billing Department. Please confirm deposit of $4,200 by the 15th to secure surgical scheduling for patient Ruth Pruitt. Failure to confirm by this date may result in loss of scheduling priority. He read it standing in the kitchen with his coffee going cold. Read it again, put the phone face down, picked it up, opened his texts and wrote to Ruth instead. Not to the hospital, to his mother. Don't worry, Mom, I'm working on it. He stared at those 6 words. Working on it. As if there was a plan. As if somewhere between 847 and 4,200 there was a bridge he just hadn't found yet. As if working on it meant anything more than, I don't have an answer and I can't tell you that. He sent it anyway, because she'd be awake by now. Sitting with Gerald, watching the morning news with the volume slightly too loud the way she always did. And she would worry if she didn't hear from him. So he sent the words he had, even if they weren't the words that were true. He'd figure out the true words later. He always did. The van started on the second try. Good morning. He pulled out of the lot and onto the main road. The sky was doing that late October thing where it couldn't commit to gray or blue and just stayed an uncomfortable in-between. The color of a day that hadn't decided what kind of day it wanted to be. He drove without music, without radio. He used to listen to things. Sports talk in his 20s. True crime podcasts for about 8 months until he realized they were making him look at strangers differently, and he didn't love that about himself. A financial advice program one long Tuesday that had made him feel briefly inspired and then profoundly sad. Now he drove in silence. Not peaceful silence, just silence. The kind that happens when you've run out of noise to fill the space and you've stopped trying. First stop at 7:52. A package for someone on Alcott Drive. The woman answered in a bathrobe. Phone pressed to her ear, held out her hand without looking at him, signed the screen with her thumb, closed the door. Second stop. A man who'd been clearly waiting by the window and opened the door before Daniel reached the porch, which should have felt efficient but just felt sad. Third stop. A package marked fragile that had clearly been stacked under something heavy at some point, because he could feel things shift inside it in a way that didn't suggest fragile things surviving. He rang the bell. No answer. Rang again, left by the door, it, noted the time, moved on. Did not think about what was inside. Fourth, fifth, sixth. Standard. Invisible, fine. Around 2 in the afternoon Jesse called. Jesse Pruitt, 31 years old. No relation, despite the name, which had caused genuine confusion at the company holiday party 3 years ago, and been a source of intermittent amusement ever since. Jesse drove a different route on the south side. Jesse was the person Daniel would call if something went wrong, which told you everything about Jesse because Daniel didn't call people. You eat lunch? Define lunch. Food that you consumed. Between 11 and now. I had a granola bar at noon, Daniel. It was substantial. It was one granola bar. A large one. Jesse made a sound that was half laugh, half the specific exhale of a man who had this conversation before. You're going to vanish. I'm going to show up to work one day and find your uniform folded on the seat and that'll be it. Gone, evaporated. That's a very detailed vision of my disappearance. I have a lot of time to think on this route. Eat something real, man. Before the day ends. Daniel said he would. He did not. 3 more deliveries ran long. Traffic on the connector added 30 minutes that he didn't have. A gate code at a property in Riverside Heights turned out to be wrong in the system. And the process of getting the right one involved a phone tree that had apparently been designed by someone who had never needed to use a phone tree. By the time he cleared all of that, it was past 4:30. 1 stop left, Harwick Lane. He'd been to Harwick Lane maybe 3 times before, maybe 4. The kind of street that felt like a different city even though it was technically the same zip code. Wide, clean, lined with old oaks that had been there long enough to have opinions about the neighborhood. The houses had names sometimes. Little plaques by the gates, Ashwood, Belmere. The hedges were shaped by someone whose only job was shaping hedges. The cars along the curb cost more than Daniel made in a year, maybe 2 years. He didn't do the math on that. The math on that was not useful. He found the address number 16, a colonial with black shutters, and a brick path leading straight to a dark wood front door and pulled to the curb. Checked the package, confirmed the name, picked it up and got out, and that's when he smelled it. Not from number 16, from next door. From number 14, smoke, thin, almost nothing, a suggestion. But Daniel had grown up with a father who ran a fireplace from October through March, and somewhere in those years he'd developed, without meaning to, a precise sensitivity to the difference between smoke that belonged and smoke that didn't. This smoke didn't belong. It was the wrong color, the wrong drift. Not lazy and orange the way wood smoke moved. This was something else, dark and purposeful and coming from somewhere it wasn't supposed to be. He set the package down on the sidewalk, looked at number 14. Big house, brick, 2 stories. The kind of place that looked solid, permanent. The hedges out front were trimmed to a hard edge. The driveway was empty. The windows on the ground floor were dark, but from the upper level barely visible against the pale October sky a thread of smoke. Rising. Dark. Okay, he thought. That's not good. A man appeared from the neighboring driveway, 58, maybe 60, broad through the middle. A fleece vest in a deep green, the kind with the zipper and the chest pocket. He was holding his phone with both hands and looking at the house with an expression that said he had already assessed the situation and formed his conclusions and was now waiting for the world to catch up to them. I already called 911, the man said. loudly, with the energy of someone who needed you to know they had handled their part. Fire department's on the way. Everyone should stay back and wait for the professionals. He looked at Daniel, down at the Ridgeline uniform, back at the house. This is a private residential area, he added. These are private properties. Daniel nodded slowly. He was still looking at number 14. The smoke was different now than it had been 30 seconds ago, not thicker exactly, but more committed. The way a fire gets when it stops being a small problem and starts being a real one. He took a step toward the gate. Hey, the man said. I just told you. I know. Then I heard something. The man paused. I've been out here 10 minutes. I didn't hear anything. Were you listening? The man blinked. Daniel had his ear against the gate now. Iron. Old. The metal was warm against his cheekbone, which was its own kind of information. He stood there, ignored the sound of the man behind him explaining something about fire departments and trained professionals and the correct way to handle these situations. Ignored it, listened. Traffic somewhere far away. Wind in the oak branches above. The man's breathing, which was audible in a way breathing shouldn't be. And then, there, so small he almost lost it in the other noise. A sound, a human sound, not a voice, not a word. Just the sound a person makes when they're trying to make sound, and don't have much left to make it with. Oh no, Daniel thought. Not dramatically. Not with the particular electricity of someone realizing they're about to be a hero. Just the plain, flat, two-syllable recognition of a situation that was going to require something from him, whether he wanted to give it or not. There was someone in that house. The house was on fire, and the fire department was on its way, which was genuinely good news. But on its way covered a range of time, and he didn't know which part of that range he was in. He lifted the gate latch. What are you doing? The man's voice had shifted. Not a question. The voice of someone watching something happen that they didn't agree with and were narrating in real time. I heard someone. He pushed through the gate. The front door was oak, heavy and old and beautiful in the way things are beautiful when they've been built to last. He put his palm flat against it. Hot, not warm, actually hot, not the front door. He moved along the front of the house, pressed close to the brick, which was warm in a way brick shouldn't be. Tried to see through the lower windows, dark inside. Smoke somewhere beyond the glass, moving slow along the ceiling the way smoke does when it's gathering. He tried the side door. Locked, hot handle. He moved to the back of the property. More open here. A patio with furniture that had been left out past its season. A garden that was going dormant for winter. And a low window, ground level. Living room by the look of the shapes inside. Curtains drawn except for a gap at the bottom where the fabric didn't quite reach the sill. He crouched and pressed his face close to the glass. Shapes. Furniture. A couch turned sideways. A lamp on the floor. Smoke rolling along the ceiling inside, thick and dark and dropping. He stood up, looked around. A ceramic planter next to the rear steps. Blue glaze. The kind that suggested someone had paid real money for it. Heavy. He could tell from the way it sat. He picked it up, set his feet. The man in the fleece vest appeared around the corner of the house, somehow, breathless and red-faced and still holding his phone like it was the only solid thing in the world. If you break that window, Daniel broke the window. Not clean, not like movies. The planter hit the lower pane and cracked it and didn't shatter it, and he had to swing again before the glass gave way and fell inward in a mess of pieces that clattered against the floor inside. A wave of heat came out, real heat, the kind that landed on his face and made him understand physically what he'd been standing outside of, and smoke, immediate, thick. The smell of it was different inside than outside, dense as chemical, something synthetic burning somewhere above. He pulled his collar up over his nose, which would do almost nothing. He knew that. He did it any thought. Okay, not a plan, not confidence, just a word he needed to keep moving. He knocked the remaining glass from the frame with his forearm. Felt a sting he catalogued and filed away for later. Stepped through, dropped into the room. The smoke was thick along the upper half of the room. A dark ceiling that was slowly descending. He stayed low. His eyes started stinging within seconds, tearing up, blurring everything. The heat was present in a way he hadn't expected, not just warmth but weight, pressure. Something that pushed against you and meant it. He blinked hard, tried to see. Couch. Overturned lamp, coffee table with something on it. A doorway into the rest of the house, darker beyond. He moved toward it, tried to call out. What came out was mostly cough. He took a breath that was wrong and paid for it immediately. Bent forward, hand over his mouth, eyes watering, straightened up, tried again, louder. Hello, is anyone here? Can you hear me? His voice sounded wrong in the smoke. muffled and strange, like shouting into a mattress. He waited. The house answered him with the sound of something burning, crackling and distant. The structural sounds of a building under heat stress, groans and ticks from places he couldn't see. And then a cough, not his, weak, wet, coming from his left through the doorway. Further in, he followed it, through the doorway, into a hallway. Darker here, no windows, the smoke denser and lower, and he was bending almost double now, trying to stay under it. One hand on the wall because the floor was harder to see, and the absolute last thing he needed right now was to go down, cough again. To his left, a door slightly ajar. He pushed through. This room was darker still, curtains drawn tight against the windows, smoke rolling along the ceiling, and the heat was serious in here, not an abstraction, not something to assess, something to survive. And there, on the far side of the room, on the floor beside a small side table that had been knocked over, a woman, white hair loose around her shoulders. One hand pressed flat against the carpet like she'd been trying to push herself up and couldn't get her arms to answer. She was on her side, facing away from him. Her breathing, he could see it in the movement of her back, was shallow. But there, she was breathing. He crossed the room, crouched beside her, put his hand on her shoulder gently, the way you touch someone when you don't know what they're dealing with and you need them to know you're not adding to it. "I'm here," he said. "I'm here. Can you hear me?" She moved. Slowly, her head turned toward him. Her eyes, dark and sharp even now, even in this room with the smoke coming down, found his face. She looked at him. Just that, just looked. And he has thought about that look many times since, in the days that followed, in the weeks. He's thought about what it meant or what it didn't mean. Whether she was conscious enough to really see him or whether it was just a reflex, just her eyes finding light. But what he knows is this: she looked at him, and he couldn't leave. Whatever calculation his brain had been running, the one that included "you should go." "You don't know this house? The ceiling is making sounds. The fire department is coming. You've done what you can." That calculation stopped. Because she looked at him, and he couldn't leave someone who was looking at him. "I'm going to get you out," he said. "Can you put your arm around me?" She tried. Her arm lifted from the floor, shaking, found his shoulder. He got his arm under hers and his other hand against her back and pushed up. She was heavier than she looked. Not because she was large, she wasn't. But because dead weight is always heavier than you expect, and her legs weren't working right. Her feet were moving but not with any real purchase, and the angle was wrong, and the floor was warm in a way that floors should not be warm. He got her to sitting, held her there, let her find her breath. What breath there was. She said something. He couldn't catch it over the sound of the fire, louder now, closer, something above them deciding to let go. "What?" He leaned in. "Say it again." She did. "Window." He almost laughed. He didn't. But almost. "Yeah," he said, "that's the plan." He got her arm over his shoulder, got one arm around her waist, got his feet under him. Starred, his legs said, "Are you serious right now?" He said yes. They moved. Not fast. Fast wasn't available. Every step was negotiated, him moving, her trying to move with him, her feet catching and sliding and sometimes not catching at all. He adjusted, kept his arm tight, kept talking, not saying anything meaningful, just keeping sound between us so she'd know he was still there. "Stay with me. Just stay with me." From somewhere above, a sound like a section of ceiling deciding it was done. A groan and then a crack and then the distant percussion of something heavy letting go. Sparks sifted down through the doorway to the hall. He moved faster, through the door, into the hallway. The smoke was a wall here, solid and hot. And he couldn't see more than 2 feet ahead, but he'd come from the right, so the window was to the right, and he kept his hand on the wall, and he kept going there. Gray light. Actual light from outside coming through the broken window frame in the room where he'd entered. Real air mixing into the smoke at the edges. Not clean air, better air. He aimed for it. Crossed the threshold into the room. Glass crunching under his shoes. The window frame ahead of him. And beyond it, shapes. The neighbor in the fleece vest. Someone else he didn't recognize. And outside air, October air, cold and real, and the most valuable thing in the world. "Hey," his voice came out rough, smoke scraped. "I've got someone, help me get her through." The neighbor moved. Whatever he'd been doing, whatever argument he'd been having with the situation, he moved. His hands came through the window frame first. Another person appeared beside him, a woman from a neighboring house who had come over. He'd find out later. Because she'd heard the glass break and looked out and seen the smoke and come over because that's what she did. "Pass her to us," the neighbor said. His voice was different than it had been on the street. The instruction giving had gone out of it. Daniel got both arms under the woman, lifted. The lift cost him something. He felt it in his back, in his legs, in the arm that was bleeding where the glass had caught it, though he hadn't registered the blood yet. He got her to the window. The neighbor and the woman from next door reached in, hands on her shoulders, hands on her waist. Daniel pushed, and she was through, out the window, into the air. He heard her coughing outside, real, desperate coughing. The coughing of someone whose lungs were getting their first good air in too long, and the sound of it was better than anything he'd heard all day. He grabbed the window frame, hauled himself up. The glass edge he'd missed on the left side found his forearm, and he felt it this time, a hot, bright line of pain across his arm, but he was already through, already swinging one leg out and then the other and dropping onto the grass. His knees hit, he went down, stayed there, face close to the ground, coughing so hard his ribs ached, tasting smoke on the back of his throat, eyes streaming. The grass was cold under his hands, real grass, real ground, real outside. He rolled over, looked up. The October sky above him was the same ambiguous gray-blue it had been all afternoon. Non-committal, unmoved, he didn't care. He'd never been so glad to see an ambiguous sky. From his left, the woman, on her back in the grass. The neighbor crouched beside her. The woman from the neighboring house already on her phone. The white-haired woman's chest was moving. Up and down, she was coughing. Coughing was good. Coughing meant air was moving through. She was alive. He'd been scared somewhere in that hallway. In the room with the smoke dropping and the heat pushing. He'd been genuinely, physically scared in a way that made his hands shake and his thinking narrow to the immediate problem of the next 3 seconds. But she was alive. And 30 seconds later he heard the fire trucks. They came fast. Once they came, 4 of them, organized and efficient and bringing with them the specific controlled energy of people who had trained for exactly this. Water, hoses, voices calling instructions. The paramedics were with the woman within a minute of arrival. Daniel sat on the grass. A second paramedic team materialized beside him. He hadn't tracked their approach. Hadn't been tracking much of anything, and the younger of them, a woman in her late 20s with her hair pulled back tight, crouched beside him and started assessing his arm without asking permission, treat which he found he didn't mind. This happened when you went through the window? Coming out. There's glass in it. Not deep. I'm going to clean it and bandage it, but you should follow up with a doctor in the next few days. Okay. She worked efficiently. It stung. He watched the team working on the woman across the grass. They had an oxygen mask on her now. She was on her back, but her hand was moving, fingers pressing against the ground. A small testing motion. Her eyes were open. The paramedic beside her was talking to her in that steady, regulated tone. She was talking back. That was good. That was better than good. That was the thing he'd been holding his breath about without knowing he was holding his breath about it. He let the breath go. And then the man in the suit arrived. He hadn't been there before. Daniel would have noticed. He was the kind of man you noticed not because of the suit, though the suit was well made, and clearly not something he'd put on in a hurry, but because of the way he moved through the controlled chaos of the scene without being moved by it. The firefighters moved around him the way water moves around a rock, instinctively, without discussion. He went straight to the woman on the grass, crouched beside her. Said something Daniel couldn't hear to the paramedic who answered. The man looked at the woman. His expression was controlled, but the control was doing a lot of work. Clifford Bauer, the neighbor, whose name Daniel still didn't know, who had spent the past however many minutes going from antagonism to something more complicated, appeared at Daniel's shoulder. He stood there a moment before speaking. That's her son, Clifford said, quieter than he'd been on the street. He must have gotten a call. Who is she? Clifford looked at Daniel. Something moved across his face. Not quite guilt, not yet, but the precursor to it, the recognition that he's been standing next to a situation he didn't fully understand. Evelyn Marsh, he said. She owns Marsh Logistics. Her husband started the company, but after he died, she rebuilt it. The whole regional distribution network. She's been on Harwick Lane for 20 years. Daniel looked at the woman on the grass. The oxygen mask. The white hair spread out around her. The small hand now pressing flat against the ground with more purpose than before. Huh, he thought, just that. Nothing dramatic. Just the quiet revision of a picture he hadn't known he was drawing. And then Detective Boyd Callahan walked over. Daniel didn't know his name yet. He'd learn it in approximately 45 seconds. Right now he was just a man in a dark jacket, who had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who are paid to observe things before they act on them. He stopped in front of Daniel. looked at him the way a man looks at something he's already started processing. Mr. Pruitt. Mr. Pruitt. He didn't extend his hand. Detective Callahan, can you walk me through your presence at this property today? The paramedic kept working on Daniel's arm. Daniel looked at Callahan. I was delivering a package to number 16. I smelled smoke. I heard someone inside. Heard someone. Yes, from the sidewalk, from the gate. I put my ear to the gate. Callahan wrote something. A witness states he was outside the property for approximately 10 minutes prior to your arrival and did not hear any sounds from inside the house. Daniel looked past Callahan to where Clifford was standing with his arms crossed, watching this exchange with an expression Daniel couldn't fully read. He'd think about that expression later. What was in it and what wasn't? I had my ear against the gate, Daniel said. You broke a window, yes, and entered the property, yes, without authorization. Without authorization, he said it without apology, without aggression, just the facts of the thing laid flat. Callahan studied him. You understand I need to ask these questions, I understand. It's procedure. I know. A pause. The paramedic finished with Daniel's arm, stood, moved away with her kit. Daniel and Callahan remained where they were, on the grass of a burning house in the October afternoon. The woman you pulled out, Callahan said. Is she okay? He said it before he could decide not to. Callahan looked at the scene behind him. At the paramedics, at Evelyn Marsh on the grass with the oxygen mask and the moving hand. She's stable, he said. As of right now, she's stable. Daniel nodded. Said nothing. There wasn't anything to say to that wouldn't sound like something out of a movie, and he had no interest in sounding like something out of a movie. She was stable. That was the fact. He put it somewhere solid and held it there. They were moving the gurney. The paramedics had her secured now, the mask adjusted, vitals being read by the team on either side. Evelyn Marsh's son walked alongside them. His hand was at her elbow, not holding her down, just there, just contact. Daniel watched from the grass. He should go. He still had the package for number 16 on the sidewalk where he'd left it. He had a mother 400 miles away who needed 4,200. He had a van with a heater that worked intermittently, and a mattress that needed replacing and a ceiling stain shaped like a question mark. None of that had changed. He should go. He didn't go. And then the gurney stopped. Not because something was wrong, because one hand, the one that wasn't being monitored, the one on the far side from her son, came up, slowly, deliberately. The paramedic pushing the gurney paused. Evelyn Marsh turned her head, found Daniel, across the grass, across the chaos of hoses and firefighters and emergency vehicles and neighbors watching from the sidewalk. Through all of that, her eyes found him and she spoke. Her voice was rough, smoke-scraped. Each word arrived separately, like she was placing them carefully rather than saying them. Thank you. A pause, Daniel. He went very still. He hadn't told anyone his name, not yet, not at this property, not in this yard. He'd given it to Callahan 30 seconds ago, but Callahan was standing 10 feet in the other direction and she hadn't been conscious for that conversation. She couldn't have heard it. She knew his name. The gurney moved again. Her hand lowered. Her son looked back over his shoulder at Daniel, once a look that carried several things and released none of them, and then looked forward again. The ambulance doors closed. It drove away. Daniel stood on the grass of a house that was still being made to stop burning and thought about a woman who had known his name. Callahan came back with a card, standard white, his name and a number. We may need a follow-up statement. Don't go anywhere for the next hour. I'm not going anywhere. You got someone to call? You inhaled some smoke. I'm fine. Callahan looked at him with the look of a man who was filing things away. I'll be in touch, he said. He walked away. Daniel's phone rang. Jesse. He answered it because he didn't know what else to do with his hands and his phone was in them and Jesse was calling. Are you okay? I saw something on the news scanner. I'm fine. What happened? There was a fussy. Okay. A pause. Long one. Okay. Hey. You know who lives on Harwick Lane? Number 14? Daniel looked at the ambulance pulling away at the end of the street. I'm starting to. Evelyn Marsh. Marsh Logistics. Man, she basically the whole regional network runs through her company. She's been building it since her husband died 20 years ago, from like 3 trucks to Jesse. What? She knew my name. Silence. What? She knew my name before I told anyone. She said it when they were putting her on the gurney. Another silence. Longer. How? Jesse said. I don't know. He started again. Are you sure? She said. Thank you, Daniel. Clear as anything. The fire trucks were packing up their hoses. The crowd on the sidewalk was beginning its slow dissolution. People drifting back to their houses and their evenings, and the regular shape of their lives. Clifford Bauer was still there, standing in his driveway, watching the house, his fleece vest looking somehow diminished. I don't know how, Daniel said again. Okay, Jesse said. Okay, come home, eat something real. Daniel hung up. He stood there a moment longer. Then he walked to the sidewalk, picked up the package he'd set down when he first smelled the smoke. Carried it to the front door of number 16, rang the bell. A woman answered. She looked at the package. Looked at Daniel, at the bandage on his forearm, the smoke smell that had gotten into everything, the general condition of him. Are you all right? Long afternoon, Daniel said. Package for Hendricks? That's me. She took it. He turned and walked back to the van. Got in, sat there. The van smelled like smoke now, so did his uniform. So he was fairly sure did his actual lungs. He started the engine on the first try. He didn't register that until he was already pulling away from the curb. First try, which shouldn't matter. It was just an engine. But he noticed it, and he drove home from through the October evening without the radio, without music, without anything between him and the sound of the road. He ate leftovers cold from the container, because heating them required a decision he didn't have left in him. He lay down on the mattress that needed replacing, stared at the ceiling stain shaped like a question mark, and thought about a woman who had known his name. He didn't have an explanation yet. He'd get one later. From Evelyn herself, in a hospital room on the 4th floor of St. Augustine Medical Center, with a window overlooking a park doing its best October work, and her sitting straight-backed in the bed like lying back, was a concession she hadn't agreed to. She'd show him a label, a packaging label, white, slightly crumpled, his name printed on it, his employee number, Ridgeline Delivery Services. They found it in my hospital gown pocket during intake, she'd tell him. The nurse almost threw it away. The label had come off the package somewhere in the smoke. He'd been carrying it without knowing. And when he'd lifted her up in that room, in the dark, with the ceiling making its sounds, it had slipped from the package and landed in her pocket. And she'd been barely conscious, but conscious enough to see it before everything went dark. His name, right there. Not fate, not anything dramatic. Just a label that hadn't quite stuck, at exactly the right moment. But that was later. Right now he was just a man on a mattress that needed replacing, staring at a water stain on his ceiling, with smoke in his lungs and a cut on his arm and a phone that hadn't rung with any answers yet. He thought about the sound he'd heard through the gate. The sound that Clifford Bauer, standing right there for 10 minutes, had not heard. He thought about what would have happened if he hadn't put his ear against the iron. If he'd been the kind of person who heard something and decided he'd imagined it. He'd been scared in there, that was true. He hadn't performed bravery, he'd been genuinely afraid. In the way your body knows things before your brain does. In the way fear is just information about what's real and what it's going to cost. He'd been scared, and he'd gone in anyway. Not because he'd decided to be brave. Because there had been a person in there, and he'd heard her, and he hadn't been able to make himself leave. He didn't know yet what that decision was going to cost him. He didn't know about the letter that would arrive on his doorstep. About the neighborhood page. About Detective Callahan coming back with a notebook and questions about unauthorized entry. About all of it. He didn't know any of that yet. He just knew she was alive. And he was here, and the ceiling still looked like a question mark. But tonight, somehow, that felt less like a problem and more like a place to start. He woke up smelling like smoke. Not a little. A lot. The kind that gets past the shower and into the pillow and the back of your throat and just stays there. Like it's decided this is home now and it's not leaving without a formal notice. He'd showered the night before. Long. Hot. Standing under the water until it went lukewarm, and then a little past that because he was tired and the hot water felt like the one thing he didn't have to negotiate. Still smoke. He lay there and looked at the ceiling, the question mark, same as always, unimpressed by everything that had happened. He got up anyway. The clock said 5:51. His alarm was set for 6. 9 minutes he could have used, but his body had already decided it was done sleeping, and his body in his experience did not reverse that decision once it had been made. He dressed in the dark, work clothes, the gray shirt, the dark pants, made coffee. His phone had notifications, 14 of them, which was not his normal.
It was 2, maybe 3.
A weather alert he never read. A reminder from the pharmacy about Ruth's prescription refill, not 14. He scrolled through them while the coffee cooled. A missed call from Jesse at 9:15 p.m. 3 texts from co-workers he'd have to deal with. 2 from people he hadn't spoken to in over a year, which meant they'd seen something. 1 from his cousin in Ohio. The cousin's text said, "Is this you on the news? Call me," with 3 exclamation points that conveyed a level of excitement Daniel did not share, and 1 from Arlo. Arlo Sims, 52, manager of the Ridgeline Depot on the east side. A man who communicated in short sentences and long silences, and the particular expression of someone perpetually calculating what things were going to cost. The text said, "Heard what happened. You okay? If you need a day, let me know. No payobvi, but the option's there." Daniel read it twice. No payobvi, obviously. He typed back, "I'm fine, I'll be in," because $847 did not become $4,200 by taking unpaid days off. That math was simple. That math had only one answer. He finished his coffee, put on his shoes, went to work. Ruth called at 6:22. He was in the van, engine running. Heat doing that thing it did in cold weather, where it pretended to work for 60 seconds and then reconsidered. He answered on the speaker because his hands were on the wheel, and the morning was still dark enough that he needed both eyes on the road. Daniel. The way she said his name. He'd never been able to describe it exactly. It wasn't soft. Ruth Pruitt was not a soft woman, but there was something in it. The particular weight of a name in the mouth of the person who chose it for you. "Morning, Mom. I saw the news." He kept his eyes on the road. "Mom," the local segment. They showed the house. They said a delivery driver. Her voice shifted, not breaking, just changing registers. "Was that you? Everyone's okay. She's okay. I'm okay. You went into a burning house. It was by yourself." Before the fire department got there, there wasn't a lot of time to organize a committee. A pause. He could hear her breathing. Could hear Gerald somewhere in the background, a thud that meant he'd jumped onto something he wasn't supposed to be on. "Are you hurt?" Not a question, a demand for accurate information. "Small cut on my arm. Nothing serious." The paramedics cleaned it. "Daniel, it's fine, Mom, I promise." Another pause. Longer. "You always do this," she said finally. "You see something that needs doing and you just..." She stopped. Started again. "You don't think about yourself. She's alive," he said. Silence. Not the kind that means someone has nothing to say. The kind that means they're holding something and deciding whether to put it down or carry it a little longer. "I know," Ruth said. "I know she is." Then quieter, "You always were in the right place, even when nobody was looking." He didn't say anything to that, because there wasn't a response that didn't reduce it to something smaller than it was. He drove. Jesse was at the depot when Daniel pulled in, leaning against the wall near the loading dock with his coffee and an expression that said he'd been waiting, and he had things to say and he was going to say them in his own order. "You look terrible." "Good morning." "Thank you, Jesse. You smell like smoke." "I know." Jesse fell into step beside him as they walked toward the dock. "Did you sleep?" "Some." "How much is some?" "Enough. That's not an amount." "Jesse." "Okay. Fine." He took a sip of his coffee. "Evelyn Marsh. Marsh Logistics, I know. The whole regional, Jesse, I know." Jesse nodded, slowly. The way he nodded when he was respecting a boundary he didn't fully agree with. "Just making sure you understood what happened. I pulled someone out of a burning building." "I understand what happened. You pulled Evelyn Marsh out of a burning building." "She's a person. She was in a building that was on fire. That's what happened." Jesse looked at him for a moment. "You're incredible," he said. Not admiringly. More like a diagnosis. Like you are a specific and unusual type of person, and I have accepted this about you. Daniel picked up his route sheet. 17 stops, same as yesterday. The world had not reconfigured itself overnight to account for what had happened on Harwick Lane. He'd known it wouldn't. "I need the hours," he said. "I know you do so." So Jesse stepped back. "Be careful today. People are going to ask you things. I'll be fine." "I know you'll be fine. I'm just saying. People are going to ask." He was right, they asked. Coworkers who'd seen the local news clip or heard something through the grapevine. One man at the third stop of the morning, a retired school teacher who received packages with a regularity that suggested an online shopping habit of some commitment, who looked at Daniel's bandaged arm and said, "Are you the delivery man from the news?" And when Daniel said he didn't know what she was referring to, she said, "You are. You absolutely are. Come in, I'll make tea." He did not go in for tea. He said, "I've got a route to finish, ma'am. Have a good morning," and walked back to the van. He didn't want to be the delivery man from the news. He wanted to finish his route. The post on the neighborhood page went up at 11:43 a.m. He didn't see it until 2:17 p.m. when Jesse sent him a screenshot with no accompanying message. Just the screenshot, which said everything. Clifford Bauer had not written it. Daniel would learn that later, and it would matter. But someone else in the neighborhood had based, apparently, on second-hand information filtered through the particular telephone of concerned suburban residents who process things at volume and in public. The post said, "Wanted to flag something for our community." Yesterday's fire on Harwick Lane was frightening and we're all relieved the resident is safe. But I've heard from a neighbor that there was also an incident involving a non-resident who broke a window and entered the property without authorization before emergency services arrived. I think we'd all agree that however well-intentioned, this raises questions about boundaries and safety protocols. Does anyone have more information about who this person was and what their actual intentions might have been? 47 people had responded by the time Jesse sent the screenshot. Daniel read the original post. Read 3 responses. Put the phone face down on the passenger seat. Sat there for a minute. Intentions. He thought about the room with the smoke dropping. The woman on the floor. The heat pressing down. His own hands shaking when he'd tried to lift her, and she'd been heavier than he expected, and the ceiling had been making sounds and he'd been genuinely, physically scared in a way that narrowed everything to the next 3 seconds. Intentions. He thought about the word and what it meant and how far it was from what had actually happened in that house. Then his phone rang. Arlo, he answered. Hey. Arlo's voice had the specific flatness of someone about to say something they'd rather not say. So, there's some stuff online I saw. Customers have called the office, asking questions about the company. Our position is going to be that you acted outside your scope of employment, and we can't speak to personal decisions made by individual drivers. Daniel looked out the windshield. A sparrow on the power line across the street, just sitting there. No particular agenda. Which means, Arlo continued, if press reaches out, we're not putting you forward as a company story. We're staying neutral. I understand. I'm not saying you did anything, Arlo. A pause. You okay? I've got 8 more stops. I should go. He hung up. Texted Jesse. I'm fine. Jesse texted back within 30 seconds. The people on that page are complete idiots. Then, in Tentayans, that's not even a word. Whoever wrote that can't spell and also can't mind their business. Daniel almost smiled. Almost. He picked up the next package off the passenger seat and kept going. Because that was the thing about having a route. You kept going, stop to stop, house to house. The world could be saying whatever it wanted about you, on whatever platform it wanted to say it on, and the packages still needed delivering, and the hours still needed logging, and the math at the end of the month still needed to work. So you kept going. He got home at 6:24 p.m. His feet hurt the way they hurt after 10 hours of in and out. Up steps, back to the van, repeat. His arm ached under the bandage where the glass had caught it. He was thinking about eggs. He had eggs. He was fairly certain he had bread. He was not thinking about the envelope on his doorstep, and then he saw it, white, business-sized. His name typed on the front with the precision of someone who had generated this in an office on a printer with fresh toner. The return address in the upper left corner said, Warwick & Associates Insurance Litigation Services. He picked it up, stood on his own doorstep, opened it. The language inside was careful, legal, the kind of language designed to be technically precise and practically confusing at the same time. But the meaning, the actual, underneath all the careful language meaning was this. You broke a window, you entered a property. There was structural and material damage sustained during the incident at 14 Harwick Lane. We represent the insurance carrier for that property. We require your formal statement regarding your actions. Please be advised that questions of civil liability may arise from the events in question. Civil liability. He stood on his doorstep in the October evening with the letter in his hand about that phrase, civil liability. He had gone into a burning house. He had found a person on the floor who could not get up. He had carried her through smoke and heat and dropped to the ground on the other side of a window, and lay in the grass listening to her breathe, and the result was a letter about civil liability. He went inside, did not sit on the couch, sat on the floor. The floor was honest. The floor didn't pretend to be comfortable. He called Jesse. I need to tell you something. Okay. He read Jesse the letter. Not all of it, the relevant parts. The parts with the words civil and liability and formal statement. Jesse was quiet when he finished. That is, Jesse said carefully, not fair. No. That is genuinely, actually specifically not fair. I know. You saved her life. I broke a window. You saved her life. In the process of which I broke a window and entered private property without Daniel. What? You saved her life. A pause. Do you have a lawyer? Jesse asked. What do you think? Right, okay. Don't sign anything. Don't respond to anything in writing. Just sit on it for right now. I'm literally sitting on my floor. Good. Stay there. I'll ask around tomorrow, see if anyone knows someone who does this kind of thing. Jesse, you're not dealing with this alone. He didn't say anything to that. Because Jesse said it the way Jesse said most things, matter-of-factly, without drama, just as a statement of what was going to happen. And there was something about that particular certainty, that quiet, "You're not dealing with this alone," that was harder to receive than he'd expected. He stayed on the floor for a while after he hung up. The eggs could wait, he wasn't hungry. Saturday morning, cold, clear. The kind of October morning that was trying to tell you something about the season that was coming, and it wasn't subtle about it. Daniel was at the depot by 7:30. Saturday route started early, and early was better than his apartment with the letter on the kitchen table that he'd read 4 more times without it changing. He was in the middle of loading the van when he heard a car door in the parking lot, which was not where non-company vehicles parked. There were signs. The signs were clear. He looked up anyway. Black sedan. Not flashy. Not new. But maintained with the precision of someone who considered maintenance a baseline rather than an achievement. The man who got out was wearing a charcoal suit. No tie. The particular Saturday casual of someone for whom even the casual version was more composed than most people's formal. Late 40s. Silver threading through dark hair at the temples. Daniel had last seen him at Harwick Lane, crouching beside a gurney, holding a woman's hand with the controlled expression of a man who had learned not to show what things cost him. Garrett Marsh walked across the parking lot, past the signs, stopped in front of Daniel. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Mr. Pruitt, Mr. Marsh. Garrett looked around the depot, the loading dock, the other drivers starting their mornings. The van with the Ridgeline logo and the rear door that needed a firm upward lift to latch properly. He took it all in without comment. But he took it in. "My mother asked me to find you," he said. "How is she?" "Better than the doctors expected. She's stable. Talking." A pause. "Arguing with the nurses about her diet, which they tell me is actually a good sign." Daniel almost smiled. "Can I ask you something?" Garrett said. "Sure." "Before you went in, did you know who she was?" Daniel considered the question. Not the answer was simple. But the question itself, what it was actually asking. "No," he said. "I'd been to Harwick Lane before. I didn't know who lived at number 14. You didn't recognize the house. The name on the property. There's no name on the property." Garrett looked at him. "There isn't," Daniel said. "I looked. Some of them have plaques. Number 14 doesn't." Something shifted in Garrett's expression. Almost imperceptible. "But there." "Good," he said. "People keep saying that because it matters." He paused. "The letter from the insurance carrier." Daniel looked at him. "I know about it," Garrett said. "It will be handled." "How I'll handle it?" "That's not why I'm here." "Then why?" "My mother wants to see you." He reached into his jacket, produced a card. Plain, white. "She's at St. Augustine, room 412. Tomorrow, if you're free, or whenever, no obligation." Daniel took the card, looked at it. "No obligation," he said. "None, but she wants to see me." "She does? Why?" Garrett looked at him for a long moment. And something in the careful professional surface of him shifted just at the edges, just slightly into something less managed. "Because she was on that floor," he said. "And you went in. When nobody was making you. When someone was standing on the sidewalk specifically telling you not to." He paused. "She wants to know who does that." He said it the way you state a fact, not flattering, not performing. Just the actual reason, offered directly. "Sunday," Daniel said. "I can come Sunday." Garrett nodded, walked back to his car, past the signs. Room 412 was on the 4th floor of St. Augustine Medical Center, south-facing. A window that looked over a park in its last good week of color, the oaks still holding some red, the maples going gold, the kind of view that was doing its best work before the winter took it. Daniel stood outside the door for a long time. He'd changed into his cleanest clothes. Dark slacks from a cousin's wedding 3 years ago that still fit. A blue button-down he'd ironed that morning for the first time since he couldn't remember. He'd polished his shoes, which he did roughly twice a year and always felt slightly absurd about. He'd done it anyway. He knocked. "Come in." Evelyn Marsh was sitting up, not reclining, sitting. Back straight, shoulders back. The posture of someone who had decided that lying back in a hospital bed was a concession they were not prepared to make. Her white hair was pulled back now rather than loose. She was in a hospital gown and a cardigan that someone had clearly brought her, because she was the kind of woman who did not receive visitors in just a hospital gown. She was smaller than he'd registered in the house. But her eyes were the same, sharp, present, looking at him the way they'd looked at him through the smoke in that dark room. Like she'd already been thinking about this meeting before he knocked. "Sit down," she said. "I don't like talking to people who are standing. It makes me feel like a patient." "You are a patient. Sit down anyway." He sat. She looked at him. He looked at her. The park did its October work outside the window. Tell me something true, she said. He blinked. I'm sorry? Something true, not your job, not your name. Something actually true about you. He opened his mouth, closed it. Thought about all the things he could say. All the safe, appropriately modest things a person says when they've done something that turned out to be significant and they don't want to make it weird. Said none of them. My mother needs surgery, he said instead. And I'm $4,000 short. And she doesn't know how worried I am because she's sick and worrying her makes it worse. And I tell her I'm working on it, but I don't have a plan. I just have a job that pays what it pays and a number that's bigger than what I have, and I don't know how to close that gap. He stopped. That was more than he'd meant to say. More than he'd said to anyone, including Jessie, including himself in any coherent way. Evelyn didn't look away, didn't adjust her expression to accommodate his discomfort, just listened. The way someone listens when they've decided that what you're saying is worth the full attention of a human being. How much is the deposit? She said. That's not why I'm telling. I know it isn't. How much? $4,200. That's just to hold the surgical slot. She nodded. Once, not with pity, with the recognition of someone who has held a specific number like that in her own hands before and knows its exact weight. Then she said, I drove a delivery truck. He waited. 2 years, maybe a little more. After Lawrence died, she looked at the window. Garrett was 9. The company was almost nothing. 3 trucks, 2 drivers who both left within the first year because they didn't want to work for a woman. They didn't say it that way. They found other reasons, but that was the reason. She smoothed the blanket across her lap. A careful, deliberate gesture. I drove 6 days a week. Dropped Garrett at school and drove. Picked him up and did the books at the kitchen table after he went to sleep. Went to the bank 3 times asking for a loan. A pause. They said no 3 times, very politely, very reasonably. The 3rd one explained that I simply didn't have the collateral required for a loan of that size. Very clear, very professional, very wrong. What did you do? Found another way. Took 11 more months. By then I had 4 trucks and a regional grocery contract and enough to make the payments without asking anyone for anything. She looked at him directly. $4,200. I know what that number feels like in your hands when you don't have it. I know exactly what it feels like. He looked at her. This woman in the hospital bed with the straight back, and the careful hands and the eyes that had known his name before he'd said it. He thought about what Jessie had said, about Marsh Logistics, the whole regional network, the company that had grown from 3 trucks and a kitchen table. He thought about what it cost to get from there to here. I don't want charity, he said, not defensively. Just true. I know, she said. That's why I'm not offering it. Then what? Garrett will explain. He's better at the specifics than I am. I deal in people. He deals in structures. She folded her hands in her lap. I wanted to meet you first. I wanted to know if you were the kind of person I thought you were when I was lying on that floor. And, she looked at him for a long moment. You told me the truth just now. You didn't manage it. You didn't make it presentable. She paused. Most people, when they're sitting where you're sitting, tell me what they think I want to hear. You told me what was actually true. He didn't know what to do with that. About the name, she said. You've been wondering. He had been. He hadn't said so, but he had. She reached into the drawer of the bedside table, pulled something out. Small, slightly crumpled, a packaging label white printed, one corner bent, a faint gray smudge along one edge that might have been smoke. His name. His employee number, Ridgeline Delivery Services. She set it on the blanket between them. The intake nurse almost threw it away, Evelyn said. She found it in my gown pocket during the admission process. I told her to keep it. He looked at the label. When you were carrying me out, she said you were holding the package at some point. The label had come loose. I don't know the exact moment, but I saw it barely conscious, smoke everywhere, the room going dark, and I saw your name, and I held on to it. She said it matter-of-factly. No drama, no mysticism, just, this is what happened and this is why. Not fate, she said, reading something in his expression. Just a label that didn't quite stick. At the right moment, he picked it up, turned it over in his hands. Keep it, she said. For when you need to remember. Remember what? She looked at him steadily. That you went in, she said. When you didn't have to, when you were scared, when someone was telling you not to. She paused. Most people don't do that. Most people find very good reasons not to. And they're not wrong to find them. It's dangerous. It's not their problem. Trained professionals are on the way. Her eyes didn't move from his. You went in anyway. That's not nothing. That's not a small thing. Don't let anyone make it small. He put the label in his shirt pocket. over his heart, which was a thing he would think about later and feel slightly embarrassed about. But he put it there, Monday morning. The depot, loading bay, 7:20 a.m. He was checking the manifest on his first stack of boxes when he heard his name. He turned. Detective Boyd Callahan, same jacket, different posture. The previous time at Harwick Lane, Callahan had stood with his weight forward, the stance of a man conducting an assessment. Now he was standing differently, more level, like the thing he'd come to say required a different relationship with gravity. Mr. Pruitt, do you have a few minutes? They stood by the side of the building, out of the flow of the morning loading. Callahan had his hands in his jacket pockets, which seemed less like control and more like a man who didn't know what to do with his hands for this particular conversation. We completed the investigation into the origin of the fire at 14 Harwick Lane, Callahan said. Electrical fault. Wiring in the east wall of the upper floor. It had been flagged in an inspection 14 months ago. The repair order was delayed repeatedly and never completed. The fault finally failed under load. Okay, accident, no other parties involved. Okay. You have been fully and completely cleared of any connection to the origin of the fire or any related circumstances. Daniel nodded, waited, because there was clearly more. A man didn't drive to a depot at 7 in the morning to tell you something he could have put in a 2-sentence email. The letter from the insurance carrier, Callahan said. Warwick and Associates, yes, that's been withdrawn, as of this morning. Daniel looked at him. How? Someone contacted the director of the carrier directly. Friday afternoon. We were informed this morning. Who contacted them? Callahan held his gaze. A patient at St. Augustine Medical Center. Room 412. Evelyn, from a hospital bed. Oxygen still being monitored. Arguing with nurses about her diet, making phone calls. Of course she was, Mr. Pruitt. Yeah. Callahan paused. The professional flatness that was structural to the man was still there. It was how he was built and it wasn't going anywhere. But around the edges of it, something had shifted. Not warmth exactly, something more like accuracy. The way I approached you at the scene, he said. The questions, the framing, you were doing your job, yes. And protocol requires certain procedures regardless of circumstances. I understand that and I stand by the necessity of those procedures. He stopped, tried again. But you were sitting on the step of an ambulance with a cut on your arm and smoke in your lungs, and I came at you with a notebook and questions about unauthorized entry. Daniel waited. You deserved better than that in that moment. I'm telling you that directly, because I think you should hear it directly. He said it without embellishment, delivered it the way he delivered everything as information. But it was real information, the kind that had come from somewhere. I appreciate that, Daniel said. I mean it, I know. They stood there. The loading dock did its morning thing around them. Someone dropped a hand truck. Someone else said something about the coffee machine. She had maybe 10 more minutes, Callahan said. Quieter. The medical team told us. When they assessed her at the scene. Another 10, maybe 15 minutes and the smoke inhalation would have... He didn't finish it. He didn't need to. I heard her, Daniel said, through the gate. That's all. Callahan nodded, reached into his jacket, extended his hand. Daniel shook it. Callahan walked back across the parking lot to his car, got in, drove away without ceremony. Daniel stood by the side of the building for a moment, thought about 10 minutes. The margin, how thin it was. How it had been there or not been there, based entirely on whether one person put his ear against an iron gate. He picked up his manifest. Went back to work, Tuesday afternoon. A diner, not the kind trying to be retro, the actual kind 40 years of the same menu, counter seats with torn vinyl repaired with electrical tape, coffee that was reliable if not ambitious. Garrett had chosen it. Daniel didn't know why and didn't ask. They ordered coffee. Garrett looked mildly out of place in his gray suit and did not appear to notice or care, which Daniel found he respected. Garrett slid a folder across the table when the coffee arrived. Read it when you're ready. I'll explain anything that isn't clear. Daniel opened it. Management trainee. Marsh Logistics. The salary was in the second paragraph, typed plainly. Benefits section. Health insurance effective from the first day of employment. The last page was a separate document, a letter of agreement from Marsh Logistics Corporate Medical Network, covering surgical expenses for Ruth Pruitt. All of it. He read it twice. Turned back to the first page and read the salary again, because he thought he might have misread it. He hadn't misread it. You don't have logistics experience, Garrett said. I know that. The training program is 4 weeks. After that you shadow a senior coordinator. After that you're managing a route cluster independently. I've been driving routes for 6 years, I know. I've never managed anything. You made a decision in a burning building under conditions most people don't face, and it was the correct decision. Garrett's hands were around his coffee cup. I spend considerable time and resources trying to find people who can do that. People who can assess a situation clearly when everything is loud and hot and someone is telling them the wrong thing. I can teach logistics. I can't teach that. Daniel looked at the folder, at the number, at the letter about Ruth. Why, he said. Simple. Just the word. Because my mother is alive, Garrett said. She built everything I have. She built the company I run. She worked harder than anyone I have ever known, and she never once asked for anything she hadn't earned. He looked at Daniel. You went in when you didn't have to. Nobody made you. I believe in returning things in proportion to what's given. He picked up his coffee. It's as simple as that, he said. No more complicated. Daniel sat with the folder, with the number, with Ruth's name on the last page. I need to think about it, he said. Of course. Not long, a day or two, whenever you're ready. Garrett picked up the check without discussion. I hope you say yes. But the choice is yours. Entirely, he left. Daniel sat in the diner with his coffee going cold and the folder in front of him and thought about all the ways a person finds reasons not to believe something good when something good arrives. He was good at finding those reasons. He'd been doing it his whole life. He picked up his phone, called Jesse. Tell me I'm not crazy. You're not crazy. What happened? Someone offered me something good and I'm sitting in a diner alone, trying to find a reason to doubt it. Yeah, that's the thing you do. Am I that obvious? Daniel looked at the folder, at Ruth's name. It's a real job, Jesse. Management, office, benefits from the first day. Okay, and they're covering my mom's surgery. The whole thing. Jesse was quiet, not for long, but for a real moment. Call your mom, he said, right now, before you think about it anymore. Call her. He called her. Ruth answered on the second ring. Daniel, Mom. He looked at the folder. At her name printed on the letter in plain black type. I can take care of the surgery. I have there's a job. A real job with insurance, and it covers everything. Your whole surgery. All of it. Silence. He waited. The silence stretched long enough that he pulled the phone away to check if the call had dropped. It hadn't. Mom. And then she made a sound. Not big crying, not Ruth's style. Just the particular change in breathing that he'd known his whole life. The sound she made when she was holding something that was almost too much to hold quietly. He sat in the diner, and he did not tell her to stop. Did not say, Mom, it's fine, don't cry, did not move toward managing it. He just sat there and let her have it, because she'd been carrying the same number he had, $4,200. She'd been holding it alone at her kitchen table with Gerald on the armchair he wasn't supposed to be on, watching the news with the volume slightly too loud, and she'd never once made him feel the weight of it even though she'd felt it every day. She'd earned whatever this moment gave her. When she was done, she said, whatever you did to make this happen. I delivered a package, he said. She laughed. Small, clear, real. You always were the best at your job, she said. He sat there after they hung up, in the diner. Coffee cold, folder open. Thought about a label that hadn't quite stuck. About a woman on a floor who had just looked at him. About a gate with warm iron and a sound so faint he almost decided he'd imagined it. He closed the folder, left a tip that was more than the coffee warranted because the waitress had refilled his cup twice without asking and some things deserved acknowledgement. Walked out to his van, sat behind the wheel, and felt, for the first time in a long time, the specific unfamiliar quality of things possibly being okay. Wednesday morning he walked into Arlo's office. Arlo was at his desk with his coffee and his route sheets and the perpetual expression of someone doing arithmetic in their head. He looked up. Morning, Arlo. I'm giving you my notice. Arlo put down his coffee. Notice, I have a new position. I'm leaving the company. A pause. Arlo looked at him. The arithmetic expression shifted to something harder to name. The house on Harwick Lane, he said. Yes. Marsh Logistics. Yes. Arlo picked up his coffee. Held it. When's your last day? Friday, if that works for scheduling. Or today if you need. Fine, he set the cup down. You're good at this job, Pruitt. Always were. You never missed a deadline, never lost a package, never had a complaint that wasn't about something that wasn't your fault. He paused. But this job was never going to be enough. Not for someone like you. Daniel looked at him. I know what I pay people, Arlo said. I know what I can offer. This job was always going to be a stop along the way for you. I just didn't know when this next stop was coming. He picked up his route sheets, returned to the arithmetic. Good luck, he said. Let me know if you need a reference. Daniel walked back out to the loading dock. Jesse was there. Already knew some information network Daniel had never fully mapped operated at a speed that defied reasonable explanation. So, Jesse said, Friday's my last day. Good. You're not going to miss me? Obviously I'm going to miss you. That's not the point. Jesse pointed at him with the hand truck he was holding. You're going to be good at this. The new thing. You see things other people don't. You always have. I've been driving packages. You've been watching how things work for 6 years from the ground level. That's not nothing. That's actually a lot. Daniel looked at the loading dock, at the vans, at the particular organized motion of it, all the thing he'd been part of every day for 6 years. It was a good job, he said. It was, Jesse agreed. And now you've got a better one. He called Garrett that afternoon. I'll take it, he said. And Garrett said good, simple, clean, like it had already been decided, and the call was just the formality of catching up. Monday came without ceremony. No fanfare. No particular acknowledgement that this was different from any other Monday. The alarm went off. The ceiling was plain white, no stain, no question mark. He'd moved into the new apartment 2 weeks ago, and the ceilings here were just ceilings. He stood in front of his closet. Dark slacks, blue button-down. The shoes he'd started polishing regularly, because it turned out having somewhere worth going made that feel less absurd. He looked in the mirror. 34 years old, new job, same face.
Okay, he thought. Let's go.
Marsh Logistics occupied the 3rd floor of a building on the east side of town. Clean lobby. A receptionist named Sandra who looked up when he came through the door and smiled like she meant it. Mr. Pruitt, we've been expecting you. Badge first, then I'll take you to Nolan. Nolan Derry was 35, solid. Patient in the way that suggested it was a decision he'd made rather than a trait he'd been born with. He had a mug that said world's okayest coordinator, which he seemed to treat as factual. He stood up when Daniel came in, shook his hand properly. Sit wherever. No assigned seating in here, one of the few truly democratic things about this job. The training room had 4 desks, 2 computers, a window overlooking the loading bay at the back of the building. Daniel sat facing the window. Looked at the trucks below, the hand trucks, the boxes moving from dock to van, different angle, same world. Okay, he thought again. The software was unfamiliar, but the logic underneath it wasn't. Nolan walked him through the route management system, the inventory platform, the client communication interface. Daniel took notes in the same system he'd used for 6 years of delivery manifests, careful, abbreviated, his own shorthand that translated better than he'd expected. Around 10, Nolan pulled up a route cluster on the screen. Northeast section, a grouping of 12 addresses, sequenced by street number. Daniel looked at it, looked at the map overlay, looked at the timestamps on the delivery windows. Can I ask something? That's why we're here. This address 17, it's sequenced 3rd in the run. But it's on the far side of the Meridian rail crossing. Nolan nodded. Right, that crossing holds freight between 7 and 8:15 most mornings. 6 minutes minimum wait, sometimes 12. If the driver hits it during that window, they lose the whole morning's timing. Yeah. Nolan leaned forward. We know it's an issue. It's been in the complaint log for 8 months. If you move 17 to the end of the cluster after address 22, the driver clears Meridian after 8:30 and the crossing's open. Nolan stared at the screen, didn't speak for a moment. How do you know about the Meridian crossing? I've run that route, twice a week for 2 years. Nolan turned to look at him, the expression of a man who was quietly recalibrating something. 8 months, he said. 8 months in the complaint log. It's easier to see from the street than from the system. Nolan turned back to the keyboard, made the change, then looked at Daniel with the particular attention of someone who has just understood something important about a situation they thought they already understood. Where'd you learn logistics? From the driver's seat. 6 years. Nolan nodded slowly, and from that point on he stopped explaining and started asking. Lunch, break room, 1st floor. Daniel had brought his own sandwich, apple, the same lunch he'd been eating in the van for 6 years, now eaten at an actual table. Progress looked like this sometimes. Small, specific, real. Sandra appeared with her coffee and sat across from him without asking, which he found he didn't mind after the first 3 seconds. How's the morning? Good, a lot to take in. Different good or different terrifying? Both. She nodded like that was correct. For what it's worth, everybody here knows who you are and why you're here. Nobody has a problem with it. He looked at his sandwich. I'd rather they just know me as the new coordinator. They will, she said. Give it 2 weeks. She stood up, picked up her coffee. Finish your lunch, Mr. Pruitt. He finished his lunch, Wednesday, 3rd day. Daniel was reviewing a route adjustment in the loading bay corridor when he heard his name from the direction of the entrance. He turned. Clifford Bauer. Not the fleece vest this time. A jacket. Collared shirt underneath. The clothes of a man who had decided this visit required something. He looked smaller here than he had on Harwick Lane. Without his street, his property, his established position, as the man who had assessed the situation and formed his conclusions, he was just a 58-year-old man who had driven across town because he needed to. Daniel walked over. They stood in the corridor, out of the way of the dock workers. "How did you find me?" "Sandra at the front desk. She told you. She asked if you wanted a visitor. Then she came back and said yes," which was news to Daniel. He'd process his feelings about Sandra's initiative later. Mr. Pruitt. Clifford looked at the floor, then at Daniel. "I came to apologize." The words arrived with the particular weight of words that don't come easily to a person, not rehearsed. The opposite rough in the places where he'd had to push through something to get them out. "I stood on that sidewalk," Clifford said, "and I told you to stay back. I told you trained professionals were coming. I was right about the facts and completely wrong about what mattered." Daniel said nothing. She would have died. Flat, direct. The sentence of a man who has been sitting with something for days and has finally said it out loud. "Evelyn Marsh would have died in that house while I stood outside being correct about protocols. You called 911. You went in." A silence. "I put something on the neighborhood page," Clifford said, "after the fire. Something about protocols and boundaries. It was unfair and I knew it was unfair when I wrote it and I posted it anyway." He looked at Daniel steadily. "I deleted it 4 days ago, and I wrote something else that said I was wrong." Daniel looked at him. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." His jaw tightened, not with anger, with the effort of saying the next part. "I've spent a long time believing I could tell things about people by looking at them. What car they drove, what neighborhood they came from, whether they belonged somewhere." He shook his head. "You've been in this job 3 days and you already belong here more than I've ever belonged anywhere I thought I was supposed to be." He said it without drama, which made it land harder than drama would have. Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate you coming," he said. "That wasn't a small thing to do. It was the least I could do. Literally the least." Something in Daniel's face must have shifted slightly, because Clifford looked at him and something in his own face shifted too. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "How is she?" Clifford said. "Mrs. Marsh, recovering well." "Good." He nodded. "She's been in that house 20 years. I never once knocked on her door, never introduced myself." He paused. "That's a different kind of wrong than what I did at the fire, but it's wrong." He turned to go, stopped. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Pruitt." "You too, Clifford." He watched the man walk back out through the entrance, past the loading dock, out to wherever he'd parked. Daniel stood there a moment. Thought about 47 replies on a neighborhood page. About the 3 he'd read before putting his phone face down on the van seat. Thought about a man who drove across town to say, "I was wrong." Not because anyone made him. Not because there was anything in it for him. Just because it was the true thing to do. Some people got there eventually. That wasn't nothing either. The surgical confirmation came on a Thursday. He was in a route review meeting with Nolan and 2 other coordinators when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He excused himself, stepped into the hallway. St. Augustine Medical Network, Raleigh facility. The surgical coordinator's voice was efficient, professional. The insurance authorization had been received and confirmed. The slot on November 12th was available and held. Was he confirming for patient Ruth Pruitt? "Yes," he said, "we confirm." He stood in the hallway after the call ended, fluorescent light humming faintly above him, the sound of the meeting continuing through the closed door behind him. November 12th. He called Ruth. She answered before the second ring. "It's confirmed," he said. November 12th. Dr. Heller's team at St. Gustin, Raleigh. Silence. "Mom, I'm here. You okay?" "I'm very okay." Her voice was doing the quiet thing, the breathing thing. "I'm very, very okay, Daniel." He stood in the hallway and let her have that, and when she was done she said, "I'll start getting things ready. I'm coming down the week before. I'll drive you to intake." "You don't have to, Mom."
"What?"
"I'm driving you to intake." A pause.
"Okay," she said. "Okay, she came on a Thursday."
6 weeks after the fire. Almost exactly. He didn't know she was coming. Sandra knocked on his open office door, his actual office door now, a desk with his name on a placard that still felt slightly unreal, and said simply, "She's here." He stood up, stayed standing. Evelyn came through the door, walking more steadily than at the hospital. No cane, slower than her normal pace probably, but upright and deliberate in the way she did everything. She dressed carefully, dark slacks, a deep blue jacket, the clothes of a woman who understood that how you show up matters. She looked at the desk, at the nameplate, at the work on his screen, then at Daniel. "You're standing again." "I couldn't decide." "Sit. Then we're even." She sat, he sat. The building did its Thursday afternoon things around them. "How is it?" she said. "Good. A lot to learn." "But good, Nolan?" Good teacher, he is. He doesn't always get credit for it. She nodded, then reached into her jacket pocket, pulled something out, set it on the desk between them, the label. The same one she'd shown him in the hospital room. His name, his employee number, Ridgeline Delivery Services. One corner bent, that faint gray mark along the edge. I want to give it back to you, she said, properly. He looked at it. I've been thinking about what to say, Evelyn said, since the hospital. I've been trying to find the right words for something and I'm not certain there are right words, but I'll try. She folded her hands in her lap. You almost didn't go in. He looked up. I know you almost didn't, she said, because I was barely conscious and I heard you stop. In the hallway, before you found me. There was a moment, I don't know how long, a second maybe more, where you stopped. He didn't say anything, because she was right. He had stopped. In the hallway, with the smoke dropping and the ceiling making its sounds and everything in his body saying, this is the moment to turn around. He had stopped and felt all of that and then kept going. He hadn't told anyone that. You were afraid, Evelyn said. You went in afraid. That's different from not being afraid. That's actually harder. She looked at the label on the desk between them. I built a company because I had to, she said. Because Lawrence died and I had a 9-year-old and 3 trucks and no other options. That's not bravery, that's necessity, she paused. What you did in that house, you had options. You could have waited on the sidewalk with Clifford. Nobody would have blamed you. Nobody would have known. I would have known, Daniel said. She looked at him. Yes, she said quietly. That's exactly it. She stood, slowly, with the careful deliberateness of someone whose body was still catching up to where she wanted to be. Keep it, she said, nodding at the label. Not because of me, not to remember the fire. She looked at him steadily. For the days when the job is hard and you're tired and you wonder whether you belong here, look at it and remember that you decided. When it cost you something, when nobody was watching, you decided. She walked to the door, stopped. Garrett tells me you caught the Meridian Crossing issue on your 3rd morning, first Monday. 8 months, she said. Nobody caught it for 8 months. I drove that route. Yes. She looked at him from the doorway. That's the point. She left. He sat at his desk, picked up the label, held it for a moment, set it in the top drawer, right side, where he'd see it every time he reached for a pen. Then he went back to work. He flew to Raleigh the Friday before the surgery. Ruth met him at arrivals, which she'd insisted on and he'd accepted because some battles chose themselves. She was smaller than his memory of her, the way she was always smaller when he saw her in person after time apart. He didn't know if she was actually getting smaller, or if his memory just kept rounding her up. She hugged him on the sidewalk outside the terminal, short, fierce, the hug of a woman who is stronger than her size suggests and has always been. You're thin, she said into his shoulder. I've been eating real lunches, still thin, Mom. She pulled back, studied his face the way she'd studied it his whole life, cataloging. You look different, she said. Different how? She took her time. Less like you're waiting for something to go wrong, she said finally. He didn't have an answer for that. He drove her home, ate dinner at her table. She cooked. He tried to help. She redirected him to sitting down, which he did because some negotiations have a predetermined outcome. They talked about everything and nothing the way families do after too long apart. He slept in his old room, ceiling plain and white and unstained, and he lay there in the familiar dark and thought about how far a person can travel without leaving a zip code. Saturday morning he fixed the gutter, just did it. Found the tools in the garage where they'd always been, climbed the ladder, reseated the bracket and cleared the debris and came back down. Ruth watched from the door with her coffee. I've been meaning to have that fixed, she said. I know. Now it is. She looked at the gutter, then at him, said nothing else. But the way she looked at him said something. Surgery morning, November 12th. He drove. Ruth sat in the passenger seat with Gerald's blanket across her lap. She didn't explain and he didn't ask, because some things a person carries with them and the reason doesn't need to be spoken. The hospital intake was calm, organized, the particular efficiency of people who do important things every day and have learned that calm is a skill, not a feeling. They took Ruth back at 9:15. In the hallway outside the prep area, she stopped, turned to him, took his hand. Not dramatically. Just took it. The way she'd taken his hand his whole life when something mattered enough to need the weight of it. You have always done the right thing, she said. When it was easy, when it was hard, when nobody was watching. She held his hand tighter for a second. The world took a long time to catch up to you. That's not your fault. That's just how it goes sometimes. He held her hand. The hospital moved quietly around them. I'll be right here, he said. I know you will. The door opened. She walked through. He sat in a chair in the hallway and waited. 2 hours and 43 minutes. He knew because he didn't look at his phone. He counted the minutes another way in the people walking past. The shift change of the nurses at the station down the hall. The particular quality of the light through the window moving from morning to almost noon. Dr. Heller came out at 11:58, told him the surgery had gone well, that Ruth was in recovery, that the prognosis was excellent, that they expected her home in 3 days. Daniel said thank you, sat back in the chair, and let himself feel it. All of it. The $847, the $4,200. Ruth's voice on the phone doing the quiet thing. The envelope on the doorstep, the smoke in the hallway, the woman on the floor, the iron gate warm against his cheek. All of it had led here, to a chair in a hallway in Raleigh. 2. The surgery went well. He sat there a while, didn't rush any of it. He drove home Sunday evening. Flying back felt wrong. He needed the drive, 4 hours of highway and his own thoughts, and the particular honesty of being alone in a moving vehicle with nowhere to be except where you're going. He didn't turn on the radio. He drove through the early dark and thought about a lot of things, and let most of them pass through without holding on too tight. Coming back into the city, his route home happened to take him through the eastern side of town. He wasn't thinking about it, and then Harwick Lane. He didn't plan to look, but he looked. Number 14, scaffolding along the east wall, new windows in the upper floor, fresh timber visible at the roofline where the repairs were underway. The brick facade unchanged, the house was being put back together from the inside out, the way damage usually gets addressed. He drove past without slowing, kept going. Monday morning, the office. He got there at 7:40 badge. Elevator. 3rd floor. His desk with the nameplate that was starting to feel less surreal and more like just a fact. He opened his laptop, reviewed the route adjustment proposals from Friday that were waiting for his input, made notes, flagged 2 issues for the morning team meeting. Mid-morning he went to the break room for coffee. On his way back through the ground floor, passing the loading bay corridor, he saw him. Young, 22, maybe 23. Delivery uniform, different company than Ridgeline. Standing beside a stack of 5 boxes that needed to move 30 feet to the freight staging area. Hand truck beside him. The math of the situation clearly not working. The stack was too tall. The boxes too heavy for one person to manage without risking the whole thing. Nobody else in the corridor. Daniel set his coffee on a shelf. Let me give you a hand. The kid looked up, startled, clocked the business casual, the office badge, the fact that Daniel was clearly not Doc's staff. Try to hand truck all 5 at once. The whole thing goes at the midpoint. Trust me. He moved to the stack. Took the bottom box. The kid took the one above. 2 trips, 4 minutes, done. Thanks, the kid said. No problem. You work up here? Coordination, 3rd floor. Daniel picked up his coffee from the shelf. But I used to drive, the kid nodded. Daniel walked back to the elevator. No one in the loading bay had seen it. No one had marked it anywhere. There was no record of it and no reason for there to be. The elevator doors opened. He stepped in, looked at his reflection in the stainless steel doors as they closed. 34 years old. A desk with his name on it. A mother recovering 400 miles south. A label in his top drawer that he'd looked at twice this week and would probably look at again. The elevator rose. He got out on the 3rd floor, went back to his desk, opened the top drawer for a pen, saw the label, his name, his employee number, the company he no longer worked for, one corner bent. That faint gray mark along the edge. He looked at it for a moment, then took his pen, closed the drawer, and got back to work.